Hello, I'm Doug Daugherty, president of Hamilton Flourishing, and I'm so glad you've joined us today as we're going to talk about something that's maybe you haven't thought about in a while, but is really foundational to Western civilization, and it's foundational for your day-to-day relationships, and that has to do with manners, good manners. What are they even for? Why does somebody even talk about having good manners? Here at Hamilton Flourishing, I write a weekly newsletter called Civilis, which comes from the Latin or the Greek civility, which is all about the way you treat people in public, especially people you don't know that well. So today we're talking to a lovely person, my wife, Sally Daugherty. And Sally, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me to talk about my favorite subject.
It is her favorite subject. The reason Sally knows so much about this is that for years she's been teaching classes of children good manners. Happy if you get in touch with her to come to your church or your homeschool group or your school group, and she teaches little kids how to introduce themselves, how to shake hands with adults and things like that. We'll be talking a little bit about that. But she's been doing this for 30 something years, I guess.
35 years.
So she's touched a lot of lives, and she's done a lot of research about where manners came from, and so we're going to talk a little about that and what's the purpose of them. We're in a society now where people are always griping with each other, always fighting. Social media kind of lets you go on a rage and a rant and whatever. And where have manners gone? How do we do that? How do we live in good manners in a civilized way with civility? How do we do that? So, Sally, tell us a little bit. First, where did the whole notion of, well, let me start it this way. What's the philosophical basis for treating people well, especially strangers, interactions, business, pleasure? What's the kind of philosophical basis in the Western civilization for manners?
Well, can I back up just a little bit in answering that? In that Aristotle was the very first person that we know that actually had a philosophy about civility, and that is actually where the word comes from in modern manners books when they say they always hearken back to Aristotle saying the most important thing that you can be is a good citizen of a city. And to be a good citizen of a city, you must respect other people in the city. You must have care for the city and wanting the city to prosper, and just like your mission with Hamilton Flourishing. So Aristotle was the first person to say this is a high goal to reach, is to be a person that respects other people. And that is the core of manners, is respecting other people and putting other people first. And throughout history, we have had people writing manners books. As I've told you before, John Locke was a man of high morals and integrity. And he said, you must respect other people through manners to be a good person. So we have, of course, we have George Washington, who wrote his manners book, but a lot of it was about spitting on the sidewalk or not taking out your wooden teeth in public. So we can't draw a lot from George Washington, but a lady that was born in 1872 is kind of our Western mainstay, and that is Emily Post. And Emily Post came from an aristocracy of American people from Boston, and she put together all of the different pieces into one place so that at that time the elite could make sure that they were crossing their T's and dotting their I's. Now, the word etiquette is a French word, and it came about from a groundskeeper at an aristocratic estate in France, and he was tired of them trampling on his new grass or flowers or whatever. So he put up a sign that said, "Please do not step on my grass." And from that, people said, it is good manners to obey this sign. A sign was called an epithet, or in French, and etiquette came from that sign. The French actually in Europe became the torchbearers of etiquette. They wanted to be proper, they wanted to show off their knowledge, and the upper crust so had just a plethora of manners. But as their society decayed, they became less of the manners torchbearer than England did. In fact, our RSVP, which now is a common part of etiquette, is really French for "Respond s'il vous plaît," and it is one of the few things that has been left over from the French reigning over manners. Then the aristocrats of England took it on in the 18th and 19th century with fervor. They wanted everything to have a bit like the Old Testament and all of the rules and regulations. They wanted everything. They had a size that ladies' calling cards had to be. It was like a 5x8. It was a pretty big card. And everywhere you went, you presented your card, and everything was extremely laid out and formal. Ladies, of course, had big full skirts in this era. You could not lift your dress crossing a street with both hands because you might show too much ankle. And they actually had the measurements of how much ankle should be showed. So we
They didn't wear leggings?
No. Lily Rue or Lily Rowe was not around at that time.
Well, this is so interesting that a philosopher started the whole notion of treating others well. I think we need to sort of let that sink in a bit, especially someone of that caliber. So he's thinking about what's good. I mean, what he was all after is about what's good, what's the good life, what's the good life. And for him to say, we need to learn to treat each other well, and really, the Bible is full of this stuff. In the New Testament, they call it the Golden Rule. We forget this sometimes, or sometimes we don't know. I guess maybe even better is we don't know exactly how to pull it off. And there are guidelines for different situations you get into when you're a stranger, especially, that manners provide kind of a greased skidway for you to get into the situation. They ease up the burden. If you know your manners, you know certain things. So.
And that's exactly what we call it, the social lubricant.
Oh, really?
And parents for years in America have wanted their children to be able to get ahead in life, and they found that manners was a way that doors were opened. Ivy League schools used to teach it in detail. How to not only do in social situations, but in business situations, and on to international, how to address this gentleman over here in Afghanistan, to how you introduce military people in the proper way. All of these things were extremely important that are not as important as they are today.
Well, I have two anecdotes to share with you. One was when I was a young boy, my parents were having a party, and I was told to greet the guest as they came in. I was probably about 12 or 13 years old. And I shook hands with the man, and he said, "That's not the way a man shakes hands." And I was he said, "You're a limp fish." He said, "Let me show you how to shake hands." And he showed me how to take a firm grip and shake somebody's hand. And I learned that lesson, and it served me well throughout the years.
It makes a big difference how someone perceives you.
That's instead of just kind of flopping, you take a firm grip and you give a good hearty shake to somebody. another lesson, this happened recently to me. I found a little boy wandering around the grocery store over near the bottom of Signal Mountain, and I was worried about him, and I started to talk to him, and then his dad came up, and we got to talking, and he said, "Oh, I told him whenever he's lost in a store, look for somebody with their shirt tucked in." And I began to think about it. He said, that's actually a good advice. That'd probably be an older person, with some sense
that had some type of grace about him. Yes.
So I know the shirt's out or the in now, but you would tend to find an older person, is what I'm saying, and it might take some concern. So there's two places that that affected my life that I thought were kind of interesting. So today we live in a social media thing, and people go on rants and they call people names, and and in fact it's a name calling time. It's call people out. So why are manners important today?
Well, I have a quote that has been attributed to John Locke. If you take the gentleness and kindness, meekness and charity out of the nature of man, he can embrace the scope of malevolent passions. And that is a bit of what has happened in our society today. But how much easier it is to go on a rant and be ugly and call names to somebody you're not face to face with, for one thing, when you are on social media. In the pandemic, it's much easier with your face mask to avoid making eye contact and saying hello. It's a perfect storm for bad manners right now. But it's also desperately needed because people are feeling more isolated than they ever have, and they walk around with earbuds in, not looking at you, so they're in their own little cocoon world. And we weren't created to live like that, nor was a city going to thrive with people living in their own little space.
Wow.
So
that's a strong word.
Parents have always wanted their children to have proper manners, to respect them and others, and the simple please and thank you actually goes so far. But there are so many other little social lubricants that can help you be at ease in situations that when you go into them. I had a mother one time ask me, she said, "Please, can you help my son? He's going on a date with a girl that he has been texting with for several weeks, but he's never had a conversation with her. Can you help him?" So I talked to him, just as I do all my classes, about the conversation ball. And the conversation ball makes conversation so much easier because you realize you have to keep the ball going back and forth. And actually, we have to practice this a lot in our classes because people tend to, when they're thrown a question, respond to it, but forget to throw it back. So I'll throw you the conversation ball. Doug, what do you plan to do this weekend? It's supposed to be really pretty.
Whatever you tell me.
Yes, besides that.
I've got plans on yard work.
You stopped.
Gardening.
You stopped.
Well, yeah, I know, but
You're trying to plan your weekend? No, we're talking right now. So what do you do? What do you do?
Well, I should articulate and elongate what I'm talking about.
No, you
I should ask
throw
you a
me
question.
ball back.
I should have a question. Oh, I get it. Oh, well, I'll be busy. What are you doing?
I planned on taking several naps. What do you think about that? So anyway, the ball goes back and forth, and people actually get so used to it that even second graders on up to high school students start giggling and just having fun
Yes.
with it. Because you become relaxed. You think, okay, I can handle this. I have to ask a question, and then I answer a question back and forth, and a rhythm starts.
Well, it's interesting that you say this, because if you were studying to be a therapist of any kind, where you're having human interaction, the primary tool that you use is questioning. You don't give people advice so much if you're a counselor as that you ask them questions. Well, why is that troubling you? Or is that a struggle for you? Or what do you think about that? It's much less, you should do this with your life. It's more like, well, what do you think you should do with your life? And that questioning is probably 60% of the toolbox that a counselor has.
And what would someone like to talk about mostly is themselves, because they know themselves the most.
Well, before we run out of time, give us just 2 or 3 simple things that if a mom or dad or a granddad is watching, that they should tell their children about. And what's the best age to start teaching kids about manners?
Generally, in the schools that I teach in, and I teach all of the classes starting at kindergarten on up to junior high. Not as much as I'd like in high schools, because high school students so need to know how to act on prom night. How many times have you been out and watched the young man not pull the chair out when she, in fact, the reason that the manners of pulling a woman's chair out was not so much because she's the woman and I'm the man, I'm stronger, but it was because dresses were full and it was much harder to maneuver to the table with a full dress. So on prom night is the perfect time to pull a chair out, and then you watch them sit around the table on their cell phones. Here is the night of high school that you'll most remember, and they're on their individual cell. Don't bring your cell phone to prom. But the question that you asked me, what things should you concentrate on?
Just 2 or 3 now.
First of all, the please and thank you, and appreciating other people for what they do for you. The conversation ball, and then introductions. Introductions are so important because the person coming up to you or whatever, they feel totally left out. It is insulting, and you're not treating them as a human being that you want to talk to. So whenever you're around and somebody comes up, or if your child sees his coach, he should introduce you to the coach. And the manners make it a little bit hard because they say the person of most importance, their name should be said. Don't worry about that. Just say, hey, coach, I'd like you to meet my mom. And manners would say, then you say, Mrs. Jones. So the coach will know how to address her. But to simplify it, just include people. If you're at a party and if you're a dinner party, your dinner partners of that night are on your right and your left, and you should include them, not just them. You can talk to anyone at the table, but make sure that they are getting included in the conversation. It's all about making people feel at ease and respected.
Okay. Well, listen, thank you, Sally, for this. This has been so informative. I'm glad you brought the history of it up. This is helpful. If somebody wants to get in touch with you and say, hey, I'd like you to come to my school and teach manners to my first and second graders or third graders or sixth graders, how would they do that?
They can contact me through Hamilton Flourishing.
Okay. All right. Well, Hamilton Flourishing, you can get in touch with us here anytime you want. We're on the web, so just look us up and give us a call or an email, and we'll be happy to put you in touch with Sally. So Sally, thank you for being here, and we really appreciate it. This has been great. Civility is all about what Hamilton Flourishing is about. So we're delighted to have you, and I regret that we didn't do this a couple of years ago. And thank you today for watching another edition of Hamilton Flourishing.